very much, Speaker. Today in Ontario is the 3rd annual Rowan's Law Day. And Speaker, as an esteemed and long-serving member of this Assembly yourself, you'll know that I've spent many years of my career on the other side of the aisle and now on this side, advancing concussion awareness and concussion legislation. I remember sitting on that side of the House as the education critic in the minority parliament, and I think you'll recall as well, Canada's favourite hockey dad, Walter Gretzky, was up in the gallery and talking about the need for concussion awareness. Well, typical of what was happening back in those days, the government at the time prorogued. There was a change in leadership, a change in premiership, and that piece of legislation died on the floor of this Assembly. Shortly after that, in my own constituency, I had moved on as the energy critic, and I was in my constituency office one day, and I heard the news that a 17-year-old rugby player from Nepean at John McCrae Secondary School died on the rugby pitch. Rowan Stringer, for whose day this is named for, played rugby. She played ringette. She was a very popular girl next door. People loved her. She aspired to be a nurse. Was taken to the Children's Hospital of Eastern Ontario after sustaining multiple concussions, and she died of second impact syndrome. I don't know if the legislation at the time would have saved her life. I hope it would have. But after that event, Rowan's parents pursued a public inquiry into her passing. From that, 49 recommendations were made in order to keep children safer when they played sport in the province of Ontario. The challenge, though, is when we have a coroner's inquest or an inquiry, it doesn't necessarily translate into legislation or ensure that a government of the day adopts it. So we decided to bring forward something called Rowan's Law. And we started actually with a petition campaign, led of course by the parents of Rowan Stringer, Gordon and Kathleen. But it was a grassroots campaign. It was the finest of what happens when a community organizes together. And we started in the pouring rain in Barrhaven on a pitch that Rowan would have played on. And the Barrhaven Scottish Rugby Club was there. Many of our community leaders, including our school board officials, our municipal councillors, and parents who knew the Stringers or had just read about Rowan. And we stood in the rain for about 2 hours. That was our commitment. I recall after that day that we had province-wide support for this. And there were 2 calls I made. The first one was to MPP Catherine Fife, then the member for Kitchener-Waterloo and now the member for Waterloo in the official opposition, and then government member, the MPP for Ottawa South, now the House leader for the Liberals. And I asked them, I asked them if they would consider co-sponsoring a piece of legislation with me. The rules had just changed. And luckily for me, and I think fortunately for this movement, they agreed. I think as the minister now responsible for this legislation and this day, I'm a bit moved that they'll both be speaking today to this ministerial statement. And from there, we ended up gathering a lot of steam and encouraging many people to join this movement. And we used to say at home we would have the Barrhaven team for Rowan, and then we would have the Toronto team. And we were able to really put forward a piece of legislation that would find a mechanism to put forward these 49 recommendations and give them a home. And as we started to build up steam, we were able to get some really cool supporters. Catherine brought us Fitz the Whip, and I hope she talks about him today. And I was able to recruit Hockey Hall of Famer, it wasn't at the time, Hockey Hall of Famer Gordon, I want to call him Gordon Stringer because Gordon was wearing his jersey today, but Eric Lindros. And through that level of support, we were able to continue to advance the cause. Even though the legislation hadn't passed, we were doing something equally as important, which was making sure that we were having a serious conversation about the impacts of concussion because of what happened to Rowan Stringer. We were able to advance the issue at a national level. Eric Lindros and his friend Tim Fleiser from the Concussion Legacy Foundation created something at Western University called See the Line, and they had done that prior to the legislation, but they were really able to advance it with our assistance at a national level, and the Governor General of the day decided to host, David Johnson, host a symposium. And that continued with some discussions with the former NHLer and Member of Parliament, Ken Dryden. We eventually started working a lot more with the Concussion Legacy Foundation, and they were come here quite a bit to help guide us. And I think that that was a really important step for this legislation. And at the time, and unfortunately still today, Rowan's Law is the first and only concussion legislation in our country. If you can think about it, every jurisdiction in the United States has concussion legislation, but in Canada, we are still the only ones. And that's why I think it was extremely important for those national conversations that I just spoke about to occur. But we have more to do, and I'll talk a little bit about that in a little bit, Speaker. When we formed government, first my colleague Sylvia Jones and then my colleague Michael DeBolo became the ministers responsible for sport in Rowan's Law, and they included me. And I remember the first Rowan's Law day, Minister DeBolo, the Associate Minister of Mental Health and Addictions, who I was just with, included me in that wonderful day at the University of Toronto. And it felt really good to be able to celebrate Rowan's life and all the work of the people who made this happen. But I think what has been most memorable since the legislation passed was getting a text message from the then Attorney General and now Minister of Transportation, Caroline Mulroney, when last year her son was getting his hockey forms and she was filling them out, and she saw that slip for the first time ever that parents had to sign on to Rowan's Law protocols in our province. That, to me, although it took us a couple years to get to that point, was what success looks like. May not look like a 10-story building that we're going to build or a rail line underneath the city. It may not look like a big screen television production that gets all the Emmys, but the little small form that came in that packet made parents aware. It told them what their responsibilities were. It told the team trainer, the team coach, the spectators, the parents of the opposing team. It told teammates in every sport in this province what their roles and responsibilities were in keeping one another safe. And I think that's absolutely important, because I'll tell you, everyone in this room knows I'm a hockey mom myself. I have been on that bench. I have been the trainer. I've been the assistant coach. I would be the one that would run onto the ice when a child was down and broke their ankle. I was also the hockey trainer once when a child got a concussion at school. But it was the last weekend of the season. And the parents had paid a lot of money to put their child in hockey. It's not cheap. And they wanted her to play that weekend because they wanted her to be part of the team, and they had paid a lot of money. And I had to look at them and say, your child can't play. Went back and forth, well, try. And I said, no. We live in Nepean. A few short years ago, a child, not too much older than your child, died from sustaining concussions. If Rowan Stringer's parents could have prevented her death, they would have. We have an obligation. That child didn't play the game, didn't play the weekend, but you know what, Speaker? The best memory I have of that season was that kid showing up and us winning the championship with her helmet in her plain clothes, standing in the goalie's area. She was still part of the team. She'll still have that gold medal, but I guarantee you she will not have a lasting concussion and the effects of it. Now, it's interesting because, as one of the things Eric Lindros will often say, is we have to shift the culture. All of us in this room, well, some of us, I know Sam Oosterhoff and Jeremy Roberts are in the room. Oh, there's there's Sam. They're young. They might not remember, Speaker, when seatbelt legislation came in and people would balk at it. They may not remember when smoking legislation came in and people were angry that you weren't allowed to smoke in restaurants anymore. But the culture shifted. The culture shifted, and we made it so thanks to legislation, but also because people stood up and spoke up. And they talked about the safety effects of wearing a seatbelt. They talked about the safety effects of not getting secondhand smoke. And I was here for that debate, Speaker, as were you, back in, I believe, 2006, when we made that decision as a province. In fact, it was one of our former colleagues, Norm Sterling, who started talking about that in the 80s. And so, to Eric's point, we have to make it so that we've shifted the culture to safety. And that brings me to today and our current environment in sport of COVID-19. COVID-19 has prevented us from being able to play sports the way we used to. It's also, as just spoke to a nurse practitioner from Sick Kids, also obviously prevented a lot of kids from getting concussion. So I think that there's an opportunity here to take the model that we created with Rowan's Law and actually apply it to the broader return of safe play when it is appropriate to do so. We have got the template, we've got the model, and that's important. And so today I met with the Rowan's Law Working Group as well as my Ministerial Advisory Committee on Amateur Sport, and we had a wonderful conversation about transitioning to not just concussion safety but mental health, and how do we do that and how do we best support it. And I think that it's in part by making sure that we continue to have a holistic approach amongst government, which is what we're doing with Rowan's Law, and that we continue to support these efforts. And so since Rowan's Law became law and we've advanced it, the government has invested over $800,000 to support these efforts. In addition, today, as I mentioned earlier in the House, my colleague, the Associate Minister of Energy, announced $25,000 to support rural communities with their fight against concussions. We recognize, too, Speaker, you don't just get concussions from sport. A number of people in the military, those who are suffering from domestic abuse, even people walking to their car who may not be involved in any of that. So I think it's important that we have those conversations. Last evening, I participated in a panel with NHLer and former broadcaster Nick Kyprios, Eric Lindros, and Tim Fleiser of the Concussion Legacy Foundation. He's a four-time Grey Cup champion. And we talked about the important effects. And all of us are parents, so we all now worry about our own children and how they're engaging in their sport. We wanted to make sure today that we could continue to profile the life and the symptoms of Rowan Stringer. And I think it's important to note, although she didn't report to her friends, her doctor, her family, she did let her friends know through text messages that she felt she had been concussed. So we have to really team up and speak up, and I think that's going to be a very big part of this documentary that we will move forward on. But just getting back, I think it's important that we also have a national conversation. We were supposed to host the 2021 Canada Games in Niagara region this year. We had to postpone them as a result of COVID-19, but when it happened and when it will in the future, we would have been able to host all Canadian athletes at a high performance level, and they would have been expected to adhere to Rowan's Law while playing in this province. And so I think we have an opportunity now as federal, provincial and territorial leaders across this great nation to have a renewed conversation about concussion safety. And so therefore on October I will be leading a national conversation with my federal, provincial and territorial counterparts, and I'm excited about that. I think that there is a tremendous opportunity, as I said earlier, as we review a safe return to play for all sports. We start to look at what all of the different facets of safe return will look like. And I really do believe as well, Speaker, that this documentary that we're going to be commissioning will have a good hand and role in that. And on a side point about that, obviously it delights me that two sides of my ministry, the cultural side as well as the sports side, will be coming together to broaden that conversation and make sure that there is a larger commitment. And I think as we do that, we have to look at the other downstream effects of concussion. We know, for example, that it could be a cause for CTE. It could be a cause for Alzheimer's, dementia, ALS, anxiety, depression, other chronic issues, including, Speaker, as we learned with Rowan Stringer, death. As Charles Tatters said, the noted neurologist in the province of Ontario and in this country, Rowan Stringer's death was preventable. And if together, as members of this Assembly, as a government that I'm privileged to be part of, as a society, we can prevent a death, then I think it's important that we ensure we have the appropriate resources to do that. And later today, if it's not already done, I will be providing a detailed update on the work that the Rowan's Law Working Group has done. They made 21 recommendations. They have completed all but 4, and those are currently under analysis with the Ministry of Education as well as the Ministry of Health. But as we move forward, I think we can all agree that we need athletes to be ambassadors for other athletes, particularly young ones, and engage them in modes of communication which are relevant to them. I think we all agree that we need to continue to have a multi-jurisdictional, multi-ministerial, and multi-sectoral approach to concussion awareness and, of course, safe return to sport. I think we have to align our jurisdictions so that we are ensuring that a Canadian who lives in Ontario, plays in Ontario, but then visits Quebec or Manitoba or any other province or territory is also focused on this safety message. I think as we encourage the sector to lead, supported of course by government, we have to seriously look at not only disease prevention but also bone and joint injuries and how we prevent that. We want to make sure that we have drug-free spaces, safe spaces, inclusive spaces. And I was pleased today to have Marc Laliberte on the phone talking about concussions as well as Orange Shirt Day, and having more inclusivity for our Indigenous youth, our Francophone youth, our LGBTQ+ youth, those who have been marginalized. And I know that with us able to do that, we will have to continue to put support into our marketing campaign. Our Hit, Stop, Sit campaign was wildly successful. And although there is limited sport happening across the province, I have made the commitment that the ministry will continue to advocate that method of campaigning in terms of advertisement again at the appropriate time for a safe return to sport. And just to say, Speaker, as I close out, what a tremendous honour it has been to serve in this legislature and advocate on behalf of this issue. My conversation earlier today with Gord Stringer, we've spoken twice, was really important to remind me of the roots of this legislation and the importance of Rowan Stringer's story and the wonderful all-party support that this legislature proved is possible, and the groundswell at a grassroots level from everyone from a minor football coach in the Nepean to some of the top performing athletes of my generation was something I think that was quite spectacular. And so today, on the 3rd anniversary of Rowan's Law, I think it has been marked with a lot of hope and optimism. And I believe as we move forward as an assembly and as a government and as a society that concussion legislation will play a key and leading role in how we view the safe return to sport in a post-COVID-19 environment. Speaker, again, thank you for the opportunity that you've allowed me today, and I want to thank in advance my colleagues from both the NDP and the Liberal caucuses because they have been instrumental in ensuring the success and viability and sustainability of this conversation. Thank you.